So, I mean,
Yes.
congratulations on the book. It's fantastic. I don't want to keep you too long. First of all, it was quite funny. I knew that it was based on a kind of a true story. Well, kind of a true story. No, it was based on a true story, and I hadn't realized that I was actually aware of the story. I wasn't aware actually what happened, but I was looking this morning. I was looking at what it was based on, and just a few years ago, I used to work as the community manager for a horror TV streaming network over here. And they had me kind of search for crazy photographs and stuff like that. And so one of the images that I found was actually the wife of this guy. So then it dawned on me that I knew exactly which story it had been based on, but it hadn't dawned on me until just today. So I'm curious, was that the specific genesis for the story, or did you have kind of another story in mind, and then you discovered this and that kind of amalgamated into this book?
Well, it's very much kind of inspired by this case in particular. The woman we're talking about is Elena Milagro de Hoyos. And that picture stays with you, doesn't it? That picture of her.
A masked face. I don't know, you can't tell if it's a mask or a face. Yes, it's horrible.
Deconstructed and then reconstructed face. And I was actually listening to This American Life, the US public radio podcast. Maybe like 2016 or 2017, and they actually mentioned this case. And of course, being a fan of the Gothic and all things kind of macabre, you sort of stand listening to it in your kitchen being like, what the hell is this? So it was that case, but more so than that, it was actually the response to the case of the people who were like being interviewed in Key West, because it was unbelievable the kind of positive regard they had for the man, Carl Tanzler was his name. And they were saying, this is like Catholic women, Catholic teachers, people who'd lived and known her family. They were saying things like, yeah, but I mean, at least he didn't kind of chop her up and put her in the ocean. Yeah. Or, he just loved her so much. And I was like, what are you talking about? He did not love her. Like, this is not what I believe love to be. And I genuinely don't think that the baseline should be, did he murder her and throw her into the sea? I don't think that's kind of baseline expectation of men's treatment of women. So I just couldn't let it go. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And obviously the case itself has so many Gothic elements. Right. And I really wanted to kind of explore what led people to see this as like a love story, when to me, it was so obviously not a love story. And subsequently you find out about these other stories, which are really similar. So there was actually a guy, I think only about a decade ago, in Russia. And he was, a linguist, he was a professor, and he lived with his parents in an apartment. And the police raided their apartment, and they found I think it was something like 30 mummified bodies of women and children. And his mom and dad had just thought they were kind of like ceramic dolls, like life-size ceramic dolls. So there are unfortunately quite a lot of cases like this one, even though it's so extreme and it's so strange. And yeah, I just couldn't get it out of my head, really.
Mm-hmm. And then it was quite funny. I mean, you mentioned there that a lot of people appreciated, or not appreciated, but they felt that they understood what he was doing, and it was kind of out of love. Something that I hopped onto Goodreads and had a look at a few comments and short quick reviews about the book, and there was like people. There was even a German girl. I can't remember exactly what it said, but she was like, "Oh, I didn't appreciate this book. I couldn't. Coming from I'm a German person, I really couldn't appreciate it." And I was like, "Yeah, but I'm British, and I wouldn't appreciate Peter Sutcliffe. I don't agree with Peter." So it's kind of was that something that was played in your mind when you came up with the book? Because obviously you're featuring a German guy and these Cuban people, and obviously not having lived in those two societies and not at that time, were those two things that played in your mind at all when you were writing the book, even though it was a piece of fiction? Because obviously there's people like that will take it to that extreme and kind of get on their high horse that they don't understand how you can write something like this about someone from their country, but it's just a piece of fiction.
Yeah, I mean, it always does play in your mind, I think. I think if I was writing something that was about the experience of, if that was what the story was about, about an innate being German.
A memoir or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, or even if their kind of nationality was completely, you know, you had to understand the character through the prism of their nationality or whatever. I think it would have given me pause, but I think, you know, where they're from in this instance, they obviously do have an impact, but it's the fact of them both being alien to America, and I mean alien, you know, in inverted commas, and the two different ways that that plays out for them. I think that's the more important thing than their actual nationalities. And I can, you know, I've lived in countries that I'm not from, so I felt I could speak to that kind of displacement a little bit. Obviously not the same experience in either way, but yeah, I mean, I didn't ever think like, I probably shouldn't write this because I'm not an ex-Nazi doctor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But maybe I should have.
But was it difficult to kind of get yourself into the both of the main narrators' skins, especially the fact that you had dual narrators there?
I always feel like I should say it was really difficult to write the doctor's perspective, and that it was really traumatizing and horrifying, but it was actually really fun because he's such a kind of gothic trope in a way, you know, this kind of scientist who's so arrogant and so kind of, you know, really believes in his own genius. That's quite like a fun character to inhabit a lot of the time. Obviously it's not always fun because he's got quite horrible views about other people, and you know, some of the things that he has clearly done and alludes to but doesn't talk about, that's horrible stuff. But no, I feel like once I get into a voice, I can inhabit it quite easily and slip back into it. Gabriella's was a bit more difficult just because I really wanted their voices to be really distinct, but you don't want them to be kind of caricatures of those two voices, even though I think his is kind of, it's very traditional gothic-y kind of,
definitely, yeah,
late 18th century kind of voice. But no, I quite liked moving between them, and I wrote them completely separately. So I wrote the first draft.
I was going to ask you, imagine maybe you did his first and then hers afterwards, kind of like, because she read his kind of diary, you know, and then it was like she added the stuff afterwards, and then I imagined you kind of did the same kind of process. You went through the same kind of process, no?
Yeah, so I wrote all the first draft was first him, and then Gabriella was added in later. So yeah, it was like I was him for a while, and then I got to be her.
I don't know. I mean, you said that it was maybe easier to write the Doctor. Was it? It must have been quite complicated because even though he's clearly out of his mind doing all these crazy things, at the same time, it's a while since I read it, but I was looking through things. I remember that he was very kind of self-aware. He always comes up with comments of things like, I know people are going to think this is wrong, but I'm doing this for a certain reason. Was it quite easy to kind of find that right balance between insanity and kind of this self-awareness, this consciousness, so you knew exactly what he was doing, but he was doing it for the greater good?
That's a good question. I think it was a challenge, but it was a really fun challenge. Like I love unreliable narrators. I love kind of like horrible douchebag characters, and I love writers who make you inhabit that. I love like Lolita. I love People in the Trees by Hanya Yanagihara. I love like confronting the audience by putting them in that kind of character's position. The self-deception thing, I'm kind of obsessed with self-deception because I am a recovering philosophy student, and we did quite a lot about French existentialism, and you know, that's very much the idea that we're all living in a kind of self-deception, which is you deceive yourself about your freedom, you know, the freedom you have in every moment. So that has planted that little seed in me that I'm just always fascinated by what people believe about themselves, what kind of stories they tell themselves about themselves and other people, often to justify their behavior or their beliefs. So it's kind of something I always think about, and I always look at people and myself through that kind of prism as well. So it was tough, and it is that balance, and that's what the redrafting process is for, right? You go through and you go, oh, it's probably a little bit too much of that and not enough of this, and this is something that he would push a little bit further in his lies and this kind of thing. Right. But that's the real fun bit. The making it all make sense is the less fun bit of writing. But the making the characters feel kind of consistent in their own world, that's really fun.
And then talking about that, you said that you kind of all these different drafts and how far you wanted to take certain things and how you wanted to draw back on certain things. I was reading the acknowledgements that you had a few people kind of read through what you were writing, and they pushed you to take things quite a fair bit further than you initially intended to. No, I mean it takes us down a very dark rabbit hole, obviously with the kind of things that he gets up to, but was it going to be a lot lighter than it is, or was it, or were there, I mean, I imagine you you said that you researched and there's all these different kind of stories that you came up with, different people with mummified dolls in the basement, all these kind of things. You must have come up with some crazy things. Were there ideas that you couldn't even dream about putting in the book, or were there certain things that these friends of yours that had read the work and had read knew about your research told you, no, these things need to go in the book?
Well, I'm lucky enough to have a really grim research workshop group. So they are writers, Kirsty Logan, Camilla Gradova, and Heather Palmer, who all write quite dark, visceral, like body work as well. So they are always pushing me to go to what I think the boundary is rather than what other people think the boundary is. But I mean, to be honest, it was kind of how much of the real case do you want to include? And there's a particular, it's just a sentence at the end, which I don't know if it really is true of the real case, but I think it's true to the emotional resonance of the story. But it's actually quite a disgusting little detail that's like confirms quite a lot of the horrible things that you have assumed. And we went back and forth on that about whether I should include it. And I decided at the end that I wanted to, because it felt like it would be dishonest to kind of not go to that extreme. But it's fun having people who don't sort of pull you back too much from your own kind of instances. And it's also really good to have a workshop group where you can just text somebody and say, for how long would a body be bloated? And they don't even have to look it up because they already
know the answer. They got various answers, yeah. Depending on the weather.
A chart on their wall.
Brilliant. I mean, also, what was I going to say now? So yeah, one of the other things I want to talk about was the actual genesis. I mean, we talked about this is based on a true story, but at the same time, the whole story, the start of the story, the springboard is the fact that this doctor, I don't want to give too much away, but this doctor sees someone from the afterlife, and that kind of is what sparks his whole journey to where he gets to in the end, to what he does. Where did that come from? Because that was the main reason why I started talking about this other film that I watched just at the same time, the Next Exit, and that it started with that. There was a little boy who started talking to his grandfather, and there was a camera recording, and his grandfather appeared as a ghost, and the son was having a conversation, and that just kind of spiraled from there, and that was why I drew the comparisons to the book and the film. Where did your inspirations kind of from the spiritual world leading to all of this story come from?
I think that comes from the Gothic genre generally. You know, if you were to define the Gothic, you would say that it must have some kind of supernatural element, whether that's presented in the book as real, or it's someone's belief, or it's someone's kind of manifestation. And I mean, I really wanted him to be to have an excuse ready, and I think that is his excuse. So yeah, I guess it never occurred to me not to have that, because I really wanted him to kind of have a perfect reason for wanting to do what he does, and I think that is a perfect reason. I do want to say though as well, his background and him as a child is actually inspired by do you know Yukio Mishima?
No,
the Japanese. Oh my god, he's such a fascinating character. He was a Japanese novelist, but he was kind of he was literally like a fascist. He was a kind of very strange gay Japanese imperialist fascist who actually he died because he tried to kind of storm the Japanese military, right, and tried to get the military on his side, and then they wouldn't, so he had to commit seppuku out of shame. So he died of disemboweling himself while trying to do a coup. And there's an amazing book about him, and he had such an unusual relationship with his grandmother, and that's kind of quite strongly based on a couple of things that that he said about his grandma, and just like what a fascinating character.
No, that's crazy. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So what did you say his name was again? Sorry.
His name's Yukio Mishima. So Yukio MIS. Hang on, I have to write these things down or I can't spell them.
Oh, no,
Mishima. MISHMIMA.
MIMA. Okay, got it.
He was a very good
I mean,
writer.
you mentioned that about he was a fascist as well. There's certainly elements of fascism in there, especially when it talks about. I mean, there was another review that talked about the fascism and the implications that has on women losing their agency of their bodies. No, that was something that plays a very, very strong. There's a very strong theme of that throughout the book. Is that something that was also inspired by this, or was that inspired by something else?
No, I mean, I think you can't get away from, when you're talking about control of women, you can't get away from the kind of fascism elements of that, or the way it's been used by fascist elements over time. I mean, I couldn't have imagined when I started writing this book that Roe versus Wade would be repealed just before the book came out. So we're, you know, the kind of who, I think the central question of the book is like, who owns a woman's body, or does a woman ever own her own body fully? And of course, in the book, the answer is kind of no, but in our reality, the answer is kind of no as well, even in places where we thought those rights, you know, were hard won and kind of hard fought for. But yeah, the fascism element, I just can't, there's so many different structures of power kind of at play in this story. And I don't think you can argue that fascism isn't one of them. But yeah, I couldn't get away from that. Again, it would be dishonest to kind of not bring that in, I think.
And something else that it was strange that various people on Goodreads again felt that their dual narrative felt slow. Not many people, but certain people said that, and I felt exactly the opposite. I felt that if there wasn't a dual narrative there, it wouldn't have worked as a story, really, because this guy's kind of dishonest with himself because he thinks that what he's doing is right, and then we need this other view. We need to see Gabriella's view to be able to kind of put everything into perspective. No, can you understand why people would think that it worked slower that way? I really didn't understand where they might get those ideas from. For me, I felt it wouldn't work. Was it always going to be a dual narrative book for you from the beginning?
No, I mean, not necessarily. No. Again, the first draft was just him, and I think it was just maybe a bit too dark. I mean, I'm not a very good measure of what's too dark because I did my dissertation on like American Psycho. So I read a lot of really dark, you know, emotionally dark, physically dark kind of fiction as well. But yeah, I mean, dude, I'm sorry that some people think it does slow it down, but I think it's that interplay of the narratives is kind of the point of the book now. And I mean, it's not like I'm having them describe the same scene from either, you know, from one perspective than the other, then, because that would be tedious. But yeah, I think it wouldn't be as successful as a book if it didn't have the two sides.
No, I felt it just gave me a lot more food for thought. The fact that we got these two completely disparate ideas and perspectives of the story. I was really surprised that there wasn't many people that said it, but I was surprised that there was kind of a few comments that said that. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think as well, like the for me, a really important thing was that Lucy was a kind of gap in the story, that she didn't have a voice, because in all the things you read about this story, she didn't have a voice. And that's kind of, again, one of the main points of the book. So it's harder to feel a gap if you can only see one side of that gap, whereas seeing both sides, you know, you could then be like, well, someone is missing from this, and it's Luciana.
And something that I really appreciate was the fact that it kind of focused on how a white male professional can get away with as much as he did. I mean, you said there that a lot of people agree with him. What was there any specific reason why you wanted to highlight this, to emphasize kind of that white professionals can get away with this kind of thing?
I mean,
was that reason for the year that you set it? Because I think you set it in quite a few decades later than it did actually happen. No, was there any specific reason for that? And was that another reason why you kind of, was it set in that specific period because of you wanted to highlight that people in that period could get away with the things that they did because they were white male professionals?
That is a very, very good question. Two questions, I think. So the shift in time period was because I wanted the bombing of Dresden to play like a really strong role in his kind of self-deception or his, discussion of him in the world. And because it is really important that we did do this horrible thing as a nation. The bombing of Dresden was a kind of pointless violence on one of our, at the time, enemies. And then moving it then also let me bring in the Cuban Revolution as a reason that the family or the father of the family would want to leave, misguided though that may have been. The question of the white male violence, I mean, I don't think that is just a thing from that time period. I mean, just this week in the news, we've got a policeman who's been one of the worst serial rapists of recent times. And he's a white man in power who got away, apparently, with a lot of red flags and a lot of complaints being made against him. And I don't think that would be the case if it wasn't a white man, if it wasn't a cis man, if it wasn't a straight man. So I think it is really important to kind of look at these power structures and who they're working for. And I mean, it's almost like this story could have been set at any time in history. Definitely, because her as a Latin American immigrant and him as a white man would always have had these kind of relative power structures, which is in a way really depressing. But I also wanted to be part of that conversation. So you always kind of have to bring it back and be like, is this what we want? I think it was J.G. Ballard said he likes to provoke the reader. And I think that's what I want to do as well. Like, I want to present something and go, well, what do you think about this? Like, look at this. It's kind of here. No matter how dark it is, this is a real thing. So then you can't ignore it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that was exactly why I thought that the dual narrative worked so well, because you kind of present us with this idea, and then you just flip it on its head with Gabriella's ideas, and it just worked. I just felt it worked so well. That was why I enjoyed it so much. Definitely.
Oh, thank you.
So now that, I mean, apart from the book, there's something that I was also interested in, is the fact that you do a podcast. I don't know if you have much time to do it, but you have been doing a podcast called Teenage Scream, which is about 90s horror movies, no? Which you do with someone that you mentioned before, no? Who Kirsty Logan, who's also just released a brand new book that I can't wait to get my hands on as well.
Now She Is Witch, which is brilliant. Her best novel yet, I think. But yeah, we started doing Teenage Scream, God, maybe like 5 years ago now. And do you remember Point Horror books?
Point Horror, no. That's maybe so because I'm in Spain, so I missed quite a lot. Is that a UK thing? Is that a British?
Well, it was like early to mid 90s. They were like teen, like, do you remember Goosebumps?
Yep.
They were kind of like the teen version of Goosebumps. So you would go Goosebumps, Point Horror, and then you would probably leap onto Stephen King in your kind of horror literature. Oh God, there were so many of them, and they're so fun to read now because they're like often quite badly written. They were American, so they had that kind of American glamour to like a British teenage reader. And they are so ridiculous. And the sexual politics and the racial politics and the gender politics are just awful. So it's really fun to read back. So we just started reading them kind of 1 week at a time and then discussing them. And then, it's been a fun project that has gone on way longer than I think any of us thought it would.
Is that something? Is that something that you plan to carry on with? Have you got time? I mean, have you got time to do that? I don't know how you managed to do it, writing books and going around. I mean, because you did a Q&A with her the other day, for her book launch as well. So I don't know where you get the time to do a podcast.
No, I mean, unfortunately, we haven't. We kind of do our monthly Patreon episodes at the minute, and we're actually doing a lot more kind of 90s bad films as well. Right. We would like to do another proper series again, but I mean, Kirsty's got a baby now. She's got a book out. We both, do work and that kind of stuff. There aren't really enough hours in the week to do all this kind of stuff, unfortunately.
Oh, well, fingers crossed. So, I mean, obviously you've got this book's out. It's been out for like 3 months or so. Well, I'm curious. I mean, I mentioned there a couple of things that I read on Goodreads. Obviously, there's always going to be good and bad reviews. But for you, are you one that likes to read reviews, both bad and good, to help you with your next project? And is there anything that that you kind of intended to write in this book that then on reading reviews, other people read between the lines and did kind of discovered things that you'd never imagined people might have come up with that have surprised you?
I have been lucky in that none of the kind of like print reviews or anything have been bad. They've all been really nice so far. Goodreads for writers is like the bad place. Like you should not go and read any of the reviews there, because like I guess like once the book is out in the world, there's not much you can do about it. So if someone hated it, they hate it. Having said that, I totally will look, but I can feel my friends like next to me being like, what are you doing? But I mean, to be honest, I had already written a second novel before this one even sold. So I'm looking at that has had no effect on that book whatsoever. That book is just as it is, and I like it. So hopefully other people do as well. But I think you can actually get really bogged down in positive reviews as well, because if you find that people like a certain thing, like if I was like, oh my God, everyone likes this dual narrative, you'd start thinking I better do a dual narrative again. And that kind of takes you away from,
I know what you mean.
From your natural process. And then you become, you know, one of those writers that just sort of churns out the same book over and over again. So I think maybe this is the same with filmmakers. You just sort of have to kind of remain in your own head. And the thing that you're trying to achieve is the fulfillment of your creative idea, kind of regardless of anyone else. But then also we're so desperate for approval. So it's a terrible combination.
But it's funny that you said that you'd already completed the second novel, and you have no intention whatsoever of changing that based on what people have kind of said about the first novel. Is there any specific reason why? Is that because of what people have said that made you realize that what you've written is going to resonate with people, or is it just because it's a very different story that has nothing to do with this one, and you're just kind of resolutely set in your ways that this is how you want it to come out?
I mean, is it similar to this story? It's kind of another kind of gothic-y story, I would say. It's very claustrophobic. It's very bodily as well. It's very kind of body focused. But I mean, I just can't write to what people want to read. Like, I know some authors can and do that, but it kind of has to be irrelevant. Maybe that's terrible. Maybe that's why I'm not getting.
No, that's perfect. That's one of Hitchcock's most famous quotes. He says he just makes the films for himself because otherwise it just wouldn't work. And it's true. If you write for other people, I just don't think it would work, because you just end up kind of, like you said, falling for what everyone says in your reviews and just repeating yourself over and over again to keep people happy. But you need to keep yourself happy to keep yourself kind of coming up with new stuff. Definitely, yeah.
I think you do have to have a kind of trusted reader. And that's what my workshop group is for me. I know that they will be honest and tell me if a thing isn't working. They will, if they love it, I believe it's good. Like, I really strongly believe it's good. So, I mean, my kind of process is that I go away and I write something quite quickly, like usually like 6 weeks, I'll have a first draft or something. And then I put it away in a drawer for like maybe 2 months, 3 months, and then I'll get it out again. Yeah, because I think you have to turn your writer brain off and put your reader brain on and your editor brain. But all the while you're thinking, oh, I probably didn't do that quite right. You know, like just when you're doing your shopping, it'll just be there in the back of your mind and something will be happening. So I come back to it and then I see all its horrible flaws. And then I kind of go, all right, I'm going to have to change this character, change this plot point, move the timeline, blah, blah, blah. So I'll do an edit on it, put it away in a drawer again, get it out again, keep doing that until it's as strong as I can make it. And then I send it to my workshop group. Then they'll give me all their feedback on it. You edit it again, you put it away again, you send it to your agent's got some thoughts, you change it again, you send it to your publisher. So by the time it actually comes to readers, you've had to justify its contents to yourself over and over again. So if there's anything you're not comfortable with, it will have gone. If there's anything that you think is not working, it will have been changed. So by the time it gets to a reader, it's kind of what you want it to be.
Yeah. I mean, you said that you write it in about 6 or 7 weeks, and then you put it in a drawer for 2 months. But those 2 months, you just leave it in the drawer and you just blank it out. I could not do that at all. Every article, I mean, I write an article and that's like 5 minutes later, I'm thinking, bloody hell, I should have, there's a sentence that I'm not, I'm constantly thinking about it. Or if I've got an interview and I've done the interview, then I'll just be constantly thinking about stuff that I should have done. So how can you be 2 months just leave it in a cupboard and not think about it and not think about changes to it? I mean, I just couldn't do that.
I'm the kind of person who always has like balls in the air. So I mean, as well as the second novel, I've got a short story collection I've been working on for maybe about 18 months now. But again, I haven't we workshopped it like 9 months ago and I just haven't quite had time to change it. But then I've got this book I'm working on. I've got this book. I've got my day job. I've got the podcast. I run a magazine. So there's a lot of time. I can just kind of switch track quite easily, but it's all still there in the back of your head, right? It's kind of fermenting.
Oh, brilliant. Well, listen, I don't want to keep you any longer. I've had you for like 4 minutes already. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the book. I can't wait for the next one, whenever that comes out. You have no idea when that'll come out now. And you've said that you finished it and you hopefully don't need to make too many changes to that if possible, no?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't know quite yet, but you'll be the first person that I tell when I find out.
Fantastic. No, I can't wait for that. And then the short stories as well, something else that you're working on. So I can't wait for that either. Yeah.
Yeah, well, listen, there'll be a few things.
Thank you so much for your time. Can't wait to speak to you again about one of these projects. And I will give you a shout and let you know exactly the dates for the Horror Festival over here. And hopefully get you to come over and we can chat in person.
I would love that. And thank you again so much for your support of the book.